Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. Well, October is here, and in many ways, that's a sad thing. Summer's gone, and we've got a winter ahead of us to deal with. But in lots of ways, October is a lovely month. The light is soft and beautiful. We've got conkers on the trees. The berries are at their luscious best over the next coming weeks. And of course, the leaves are all changing colour. And also for a gardener, it's a busy month. The more you can get done in October, the better the garden will look next spring and summer. And in today's programme, I'll be taking stock of the fruit here at Berryfields. Carol will be busy in the long borders, lifting plants, dividing them, and then replanting them. And Joe will be doing autumn work on our lawns, giving them the sort of treatment they need to look really good next summer. 2 years ago, we made 3 new fruit gardens, each quite small and each with its own character, but sharing a distinctly fruity theme. Now, at this end is where we grow our soft fruit. And today I do want to lift and plant out the runners that Carol took a few weeks ago from the strawberries. Strawberries reproduce themselves by throwing out these runners, great long strands, and along their length they may have to have 3 or 4 little plantlets that where they touch the ground will develop root, and a new plant will grow from that. Now, if you leave them, you just get a thicket. So you need to cut them off, but it's the best source of new plants. And we've got a nice one here, actually, that all I need to do is to cut it free from the parent, because it should have its own roots. So I can just cut that there like that, and then lift it. And Carol did these into a pot. So there you are, a potted up perfect strawberry. And the point about strawberries is they produce their best fruit in their 2nd and 3rd year. So you need to keep on producing a supply of new plants and throwing them away after the 3rd year. That way you avoid the build-up of viruses, which they are very prone to. So a perfect strawberry plant that in 2 years' time will be giving you a mass of fruit. There'll be some next year, but it's not so good. And then I can just plant this out wherever I like. I'll just pop it in the ground, and that will grow away. So we're preparing for 2 years down the line, and let them have cold. Strawberries need cold in winter in order to fruit really well the following summer. Now, in the ornamental fruit garden, it may look as though it's just about flowers without any fruit at all. In fact, I'm going to remove some of the flowers now because this Nicotiana is over rather early. They've been a disappointing batch. I think it's because the seedlings weren't very good. But the core of this part of the garden is all about ornamental fruit. We've chosen the roses. Rosa rugosa, for example, has wonderful fruits. And we've got the quinces. This quince hasn't borne any fruit yet. It has lovely pink blossom, but it will. It'll fruit in the next year or two. We've got the elder with its berries. We've got the holly chosen for its berries. Over here, I want to get at the fig behind. Now, the fig is sort of ornamental through its foliage, but of course, the fruit is very edible indeed, delicious. And although growing figs in this country can be a bit hit and miss, it's certainly worth a try, and I want to show you what we've got in here. So let's clear the decks. Now, we can see the fig that's growing behind. I planted this a couple of years ago, and it's doing very nicely indeed. Plenty of growth. It'll need pruning next spring, but that's fine. Figs bear 3 crops at once. There are those that are ready to eat, and they will be brown in this case because it's a brown turkey fig. The second crop are these hard green ones, which, if they were growing in the Mediterranean, say, would ripen in around about February time. And the third crop, which you can just see growing in between the leaves and the stem, a minute little almost pinhead size, which will give us next year's harvest. When all the leaves are dropped, take every fig that you can hold in your hand and take it off, because if you leave them on, they'll inhibit the growth of those tiny little fruits. And don't worry if they're small, they will grow big enough to give you a decent harvest by next October. Now, the third of our 3 fruit gardens is this one, which we call the small town fruit garden. And the idea is to show that even if you live in the middle of a city and you have a garden just this size, you can have a whole range of delicious fruit. And we've grown apples, plums, a nectarine, a grapevine, which we put in earlier this year, and you can see is growing really well, and hopefully will start to produce some grapes next year, though, not this autumn. This is a gooseberry. Not a single leaf on it because they've all been eaten by sawfly larvae. The sawfly comes in, lays its eggs at the base of the plant, and when the larvae, which look just like little caterpillars, hatch out, they then proceed to feed on the foliage of the gooseberry. And they'll do the same to red currants, and in fact there's a Solomon seal sawfly too. And if they're left unchecked, they can totally defoliate it. Now normally with standard gooseberries, they get round that because they have ventilation. That's one of the reasons why we grow them as standards, because sawfly hate being exposed to wind. But because the herbs have grown so well around them and we've got the fence there, actually it's very enclosed, and that's perfect for sawfly. So we need to clear space around it or move the gooseberries. And one of the things blocking it is this lemon verbena. Now this is a fabulous plant, probably the best scent of any foliage you can grow in the garden. And it's really superb, and it's got these delicate flowers. But I'll tell you what, next spring I'll put any money you like on that gooseberry recovering and looking fine, and this would have a really tough time of it coming through anything but the mildest of winters because it's a tender plant. But I think the thing to do is to take cuttings. Any tender plants, take cuttings now, and that ensures against possible loss. Now the best type of cuttings are semi-ripe. A growth like that, you can just cut that off, not where there are flowers, and you can take a cutting by stripping off the lower leaves, putting it into a well-drained compost, and that should strike over winter in a container, and then you've got a new plant. But what I do when I'm walking around the garden is take a number of cuttings, and this would apply to penstemons or salvias just as equally at this time of year, and pop them in the bag. And that keeps them moist and means that you don't have to rush in and take the cutting immediately. So a polythene bag in your pocket is a good idea at this time of the year. Now, cuttings gives us plants for free. Taking a runner from a strawberry gives us a really healthy plant for free again. And you don't necessarily have to have a fruit garden to get fruit, because there's lots of fruit for free growing in our hedgerows at this time of the year. So we went along to Wisley to see exactly what fruit you can get from wild hedgerows.
In any typical hedgerow in Britain, you find there's a whole range of fruits and nuts available to you, with such things as roses, sloes, the alder, all coming into fruition at the same time. Sloes or blackthorn are probably one of the most prolific fruits you'll get in a hedgerow. You wouldn't dare eat one of these completely raw, because it's one of the most acidic or sour fruits you'll ever want to try. It'll just turn your mouth inside out. But if you allow the first frost to actually soften the skin and then put them in a bottle with gin, you'll find it makes a lovely liqueur for around Christmas time, sloe gin. Hedgerows have always been used as an important corridor for wildlife to get from one area to another. They have also been very important in our past for getting vitamins into the diet. This is one of the most colourful additions you can get to the hedgerow, the dog rose. The rose hips themselves have very high vitamin C levels, some say 20 times that of an orange. Be warned about the rose hips, however. The seeds inside have very fine hairs and actually can be known as an irritant. It can actually get stuck in the throat. When harvesting them, you have to make sure you scrape all the seeds out. Here we have the viburnum. Is not a usual plant you find in the hedgerow, but very attractive. You have to cook the berries before eating them, and in parts of North America they are used as an alternative to cranberries. The alder, probably the crown jewel of all hedgerow production. Harvested when fully ripe and turned into a cordial, which actually helps stop colts in their tracks. A very useful and well-loved tree in the hedgerow. Here's an interesting one, the crab apple, often found within hedgerows and planted widely within Britain's gardens for the flowers and the coloured fruits. The fruits have very high levels of pectin, so actually can be mixed with other fruits with low levels of pectin, such as the blackberry, to help them set when making the jams and jellies. Look at this, the bramble or blackberry, the archetypal British fruit, a late summer fruit, ideal in apple pies. However, the folklore says you don't eat it after Michaelmas Day, which is the 29th of September. It's to do with when the devil was thrown out of heaven and he landed in a bramble bush, and ever since he spits on them after that date. Hedgerows are far more than just a boundary. They're a habitat and a home for insects, birds and mammals. They also provide us with all year round interest and something that's close to my heart, something for free.
Native hedgerows are so rich and fruitful, and we're going to plant one ourselves at Berryfield in a few weeks' time behind the nectar bar. But there are lots of things to do, really hard work in this herbaceous border at the moment. Now I'm tackling this monarda. It's been full of mildew. It's easy enough to lift out, she said. And as you can see, it hasn't got much root underneath, just like mint and Michaelmas daisies, which is split in exactly the same way. But you mustn't do your asters now. Don't do your Michaelmas daisies now. Do them in the spring. But this is the perfect time for this monarda. So I'm going to make sure I trim all this rubbish off that's full of mildew, and we'll burn it. Get rid of it completely. And then I'm just going to pull this whole thing apart. And it does come apart pretty easily. And you can see how superficially rooted it is. This plant just lives on the surface of the soil and moves around gradually. And when we replant it, all we need to do is lay them on the surface of the soil, some good rich compost, a bit of mulch over the top, and these will be well rooted and well away by the spring. These long borders have been planted for about 3 years now, and lots of things in here are in need of division. When herbaceous borders were the real thing, they'd be dug up every couple of years and divided. And the whole idea was that that rejuvenated your plants, but of course the great thing is it also means you get extra ones for free. Now this is this traditional fork to fork method. You put your 2 forks in. I'm using these on this hemeroculus. This is definitely the best way of splitting daylilies, niphofias, anything that's got these big solid crowns and long roots. And you just use the forks as a lever. You push them together, and with a bit of luck they divide up beautifully. That's made 2 nice big pieces. I could split them down further, but before you replant them, it's a good idea to actually take this foliage down. And it doesn't matter how far down you cut them, you can really make them quite short and tidy. And the whole idea of trimming the tops on plants that you're dividing is that you enable the roots to really take hold before they try and regrow. And at this time of the year, that's the most important thing. So you can replant your divisions straight into the border, or if you want to, you can make a little nursery bed. It doesn't have to be anything special. A bit in the vegetable garden's a good idea, because they're very often empty at this time of year, and your plants will settle down there, and in the spring you can lift them and replant them in their permanent position. Now, the other kind of plant I want to divide is fibrous rooted perennials. This is a geum, quite a sort of large root system here. I've shaken some of the soil off, but you can see it's old and it's congested. It's got lots and lots of old roots here, and we don't want any of that. That's really non-productive. Some bits you can just pull off, and you can see that's a lovely fat new shoot, and it's got its own root system already. But if you want to get into this great tangle here, probably the best way of doing it is to actually wash the roots, and then you can really see what you're doing. So just plunge the whole lot into a bucket, and with a bit of luck, when you take it out, it'll fall to pieces magically. Yeah, it's instantly going to come into lots and lots of separate pieces. But can you see, there's the old root. Now, that's really not up to much at all. So just snip that off, or you can break it. Trim the foliage down, and what you're left with is this nice new shoot, and those are all ready to plant. All the plants I've divided will be looking great next spring, but here are some that are at their best right now. Aster Little Carlo is the queen of Michaelmas daisies. Because it's really close to the wild species and not overbred, it isn't prone to disease, and it's strong and self-supporting and seldom needs staking. Butterflies and bees love its clouds of blue daisies.
The monkshood Aconitum carmichaeli orensii adds an important tone of blue to the autumn border. It also has glossy dark green leaves that stay strong whilst all around them the colours are fading. It's a beautiful flower, but do be careful because all parts of the plant are toxic.
The anemone Max Vogel is amongst one of the best autumn border flowers. The large, delicate, soft pink blooms add a touch of elegance to the garden, and the tall, upright stems don't need staking.
Right, this is not some beautiful new dustbin, but a representation of how badly we're recycling things. Now, most of us know that recycling is really important, but recent figures have shown the level of inefficiency. If this is a household's rubbish in a year, the red part, which is 20%, is genuine rubbish and needs to be disposed of. But 80% of it could be recycled. Half of that 80% are things like plastics and glass that could be turned into other objects. And half of it, this dark green area, is material that could all be composted. Now, as gardeners, not only should we be recycling, but also we need compost. Compost is the best thing that we could possibly have in the garden. So we must all do it, however small our garden. It's also getting easier all the time. We rang our local council and we got these bins from them. This cost £5. This huge one was £15, and they will deliver them to you. So it is possible to get containers. Now, when you have the right container, how do you go about transforming normal garden waste like this into the finished item? Berryfield's best. This is compost that's ready for use. It feels nice. It smells sweetly of the woodland floor. And it would be really expensive to buy. You're looking at over £100 worth of the very finest soil improver there. Well, we all have the material, every household. Things like your kitchen waste. That is all compostable, although don't put too much things like citrus in, because that's very acidic. And certainly don't put cooked material in. Rice, pasta, potatoes, meat, fats, that'll just attract vermin. The most common composting material are grass clippings. Everybody has them, and people who don't know how to compost put them in a heap and they turn into a sludge. And I'll tell you in a minute how to avoid that. But they will be part of a good compost heap. And things like annual weeds and all the top growth from the border, all your prunings, all go on the compost heap. Now, good compost, very roughly, wants to be 50% nitrogen, 50% carbon. Something like grass has got twice as much nitrogen as carbon. So for every bucket of grass that you add, you want to add the same volume of a very high carbon material, like straw or dry leaves or shredded paper. That will do the job, or brown paper scrumpled up. It'll do the job just as well. Mix it all up with the grass clippings. That way it'll rot down properly and not get that horrible sludge. So you need to mix up the right level of ingredients. You then need to chop it up. Ideally, a shredder is a real godsend when it comes to composting, or a mower. For years I've used a mower. You just put your composting material on the ground, mow it a few times, it chops it all up, collects it up into a bag, and then you put it on the heap. So you've got your right mixture, you've chopped it up, you've mixed it up. Now the final thing to do is to turn it. If I was to take the most perfect mix of compost material in the world and pop it in this bin, just layer it on top, fill it up, it would make good compost, but it would take between 1 and 2 years. So what do you do whilst that's making? You're going to need about 5 or 6 bins to cover that period. The answer is to turn it. When it's full, take off the top and put the contents back in again. Do that about 3 times and you'll find it will make into compost after about 4 or 5 months. Fill it up in about a month or 6 weeks and then turn it and keep doing that process. And ideally don't put it on hard material but on soil, and then you'll get the bacteria, you'll get the beetles, you'll get the worms, all doing their work, which is a really important part of compost making. Now when you've finally got your magical compost, and by the way, there's no need to use any accelerators or any magic ingredients. It'll make itself every time. When you've got it, you don't need a huge amount. About 1 inch a year is enough for good soil, and 2 inches a year will transform the worst soil into lovely, well-textured, healthy stuff. And the easiest way to use it is as a mulch.
The key to mulching is to do it regularly, ideally twice a year in the spring and the autumn. And it's the same with lawns, it's about regular maintenance. So really it's a 3-part process at this time of year. We want to scarify the lawn, we want to aerate it, and then we want to top dress it as well. So this is a scarifying machine that I've been using. It's pretty effective. You can buy them for 30 quid or you can hire them for the day. And what it's doing is taking out all the thatch from the lawn. You can see it's actually picking out a lot of stuff here. It's got clover in there, it'll take the moss out and it'll also take the thatch out, so we're getting air around the grass itself, around the plants of the grass, to encourage them to grow. So you can use that, and it's quite effective, I have to say. It's a pretty effective machine. Or you can just use one of these. Now this is a springtime rake or wire rake. Don't use a leaf rake, because what it does is these little spikes get stuck in. And this is much harder work. It's good for a workout. And I reckon this area is about 20 square metres. It'll take about an hour to do it really properly. And a lot of people are really timid. They won't take enough out. They'll just go over it lightly. You have to get stuck in. I mean, look how much has come out of this area here. We've got loads of thatch and old moss. And that's going to go straight onto the compost heap. And we'll just put it back into the garden at some point, so it's not wasted there. Now, after you've scarified the whole area, what we need to do is aerate the lawn. So we're looking to get air underneath, into the roots of the plants, underneath soil level. And there's various ways of doing it. I mean, this is probably the easiest tool to use. And what you do is literally stick it in, wiggle the fork around, and actually if your lawn's really compacted, and you'll know if it is because it'll be full of moss, and in the summer it might crack as well, you can actually bend it back a bit and there, get some movement in, get some air underneath it. There, so I'd say that's pretty much the easiest tool to use, and you've probably all got one. This is a different tool actually. This is called hollow tining, where you actually take a plug out of the lawn. You're taking a whole section. I'll show you. This is about £10, this tool. And as you dig in, you can see the plug pushing out the top there. So what that actually does is make a real hole in the lawn, and then you can backfill that with top dressing that we're going to do in a minute, and that'll really open it up. I mean, I think this is probably the best tool for the job. But you can also, if you want, buy a pair of these. Now these are spike shoes. You'll find them in a lot of garden centres. £3.99, can't go wrong. You put them on your feet and then you prance around your lawn. You might feel a bit foolish, and they're not that deep, but they will work. I mean, if you regularly go over your lawn with them, they will keep the air in, and that's the important thing. So once we've opened it up and we've found some holes in there, what we're going to do is top dress it. You can buy ready-mixed top dressing from a garden centre, but if you've got a large lawn, it can get quite expensive. So we've mixed our own here. We've used 6 parts sharp sand, 2 parts loam, and a little bit of compost added in there as well. But don't get hung up on the mixtures. Just make sure there's plenty of sand in it, and that's really going to keep it well aerated, keep the drainage good. That's the important thing. So what I'm doing is just going to pour it out on the lawn here. And then get yourself a leaf rake, or you can use a broom, and we're going to rake it into all the holes that we've made. And this will also help even out the ground, little bumps, undulations in the lawn. This lawn's going to look a little bit of a mess for a few weeks, but next year it's going to be lovely and lush and green.
Now you can see our pumpkins are basking up as much autumn sunlight as they can, and loads of you responded to our trial, and I'll be announcing the results in next week's programme. Remember, there were 3 types of pumpkin: Crown Prince, Jack of all trades and Hundredweight, and Hundredweight had its own trial to see who could grow the heaviest. Now next year we'll be doing more trials, but there's one that is really big and special. We're calling this Tulip Watch, and it's part of an attempt to monitor the effects of climate change on the flowering patterns in our garden. We shall be giving away 15,000 tulip bulbs of spring green in packs of 3 that you can use to plant in your garden. Now, this is a huge trial that we're doing with the RHS and many of the country's key gardens, not just over 1 year, but over 10 years. At the end of that period, we should have a good picture of the effects of climate change on the flowering of our garden plants by monitoring when and how these tulips, which are spring green, appear. Now, to get hold of the bulbs, you need to do this through your local BBC radio station, but don't ring them up. If you go to our website, which is bbc.co.uk/gardening, or to CFAX, page 621, you'll find details of the programmes to listen to on your local radio station that will tell you exactly the relevant details for every area. And when you get hold of them, don't plant them. It's a bit early to plant tulips anyway. But on the programme on November the 4th, I'll be showing you exactly how to plant them, because it's important that we all do it in exactly the same way. And then on Bonfire Night, on November the 5th, all of us, right across the country, will be planting these tens of thousands of bulbs so that the experiment has real validity. Now, there are lots of other jobs that you can get on with this weekend, and here are some of them.
Climbing roses can be pruned when the flowering has finally finished. Remove any dead or damaged growth, tie in long shoots if you want to extend the framework, and prune lateral stems back to 2 or 3 leaves or buds to encourage flowering next year.
It's a good time to get your greenhouse clean to maximise the amount of light through the winter. Use a garden disinfectant and make sure you get in all those corners where pests may hide.
We're just checking each of the pumpkins to see that they're not sitting in the wet, because at this time of year they can rot, but on the other hand we want them to ripen, and so stay outside and get as much sun as possible.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see the results, see if anybody's grown any bigger pumpkins than we have.
I think maybe they have.
I think they probably
yes. Well, we'll be back at the same time next week, and Carol's going to be planting some alpines, Joe's going to be road testing some wheelbarrows, and I, of course, will be revealing the results of the pumpkin trial. So join us then at our normal time. Bye-bye. After the gloom of last week, things will get brighter but a bit more energetic. We've got wind and rain moving in from the west across Scotland, Western England and Wales on Saturday morning. Now this will cover the whole country by evening, but it will lessen as it moves. So in the southeast it will be pretty light. It'll be very warm down there too, reaching 20 degrees. Sunday morning will be bright and clear for all of us except for the southeast, which will be grey and drizzly but soon brighten up. Make the most of this on Sunday, because there's more wind and rain following its wake.